The psychology of staying calm and positive in life begins with a simple observation. Many people believe calmness and positivity come from perfect circumstances. They imagine that peace appears when problems disappear, when life becomes stable, or when everything finally goes according to plan. But real life rarely works that way. Challenges appear, plans change, and unexpected difficulties become part of every person's journey. The difference between those who remain steady and those who feel constantly overwhelmed is often not their situation, but their mindset. Calmness is not something life gives you. It is something the mind learns to create. Positivity is not ignoring problems, but choosing how to respond to them. This audiobook explores the psychology behind emotional stability and explains how awareness, perspective, and habits can gradually build a calm and positive approach to everyday life. Chapter 1. Why calmness is a learned skill. Many people believe calmness is a personality trait that some individuals are simply born with. They look at someone who remains steady during difficult situations and assume that person naturally possesses a peaceful mind. In reality, calmness is rarely an accident. It is usually the result of experience, awareness, and repeated practice. Just like any other skill, the mind learns calmness over time through exposure to challenges and reflection on how to respond to them. When a person faces a stressful situation, the mind reacts quickly. This reaction is part of human survival. The brain is designed to detect danger and respond immediately. Because of this instinct, emotions like fear, anger, or worry often appear before rational thinking has time to intervene. Calmness begins to develop when a person learns to slow down this automatic reaction. There was a young professional who often felt overwhelmed at work whenever unexpected problems appeared. At first, he believed stress was simply part of his personality. Over time, he began observing how his reactions worked. He noticed that his stress came not only from the situation, but from how quickly his mind imagined negative outcomes. Through practice, he started pausing before reacting. Instead of responding instantly, he allowed himself a few moments to breathe and think. Those small pauses gradually changed how he experienced stressful situations. Learning calmness also involves understanding emotions rather than suppressing them. Emotions are natural signals that tell us something about our environment or our thoughts. When people attempt to ignore or fight their emotions, those feelings often grow stronger. Another important part of developing calmness is perspective. When a situation appears overwhelming, the mind tends to focus only on immediate difficulty. By stepping back and looking at the larger picture, the same situation can feel more manageable. There was a student who once panicked during exams because he feared failure. After learning to observe his thoughts more carefully, he realized that much of his stress came from imagining worst-case scenarios, rather than focusing on the task in front of him. Calmness also grows through repetition. Each time you face a challenge and respond with patience instead of panic, the brain learns a new pattern. Gradually, this pattern becomes stronger than the old habit of reacting impulsively. Daily habits influence this learning process as well. Activities such as reflection, deep breathing, exercise, or quiet thinking can train the mind to slow down and become more aware of its reactions. Another discovery people often make is that calmness does not mean the absence of problems. Life continues presenting unexpected situations. What changes is the way the mind approaches those situations. There was a manager who became known for remaining composed during difficult meetings. When someone asked how he stayed calm, he explained that years earlier he had been just as reactive as everyone else. What changed was his decision to practice patience during small situations every day. Over time, those small practices reshaped how his mind responded to pressure. Calmness became part of his behavior, not because he avoided stress, but because he learned how to face it with awareness. Chapter 2. The mind reacts before it thinks. The human mind is designed to react quickly. Long before careful thinking appears, the brain sends signals that prepare the body to respond. This reaction once helped humans survive dangerous environments where hesitation could be costly. Even though modern life rarely contains the same threats, the brain still follows that ancient pattern. When something unexpected happens, emotions often appear before logic has time to evaluate the situation. This is why a sudden problem can trigger frustration, worry, or anger within seconds. The mind immediately tries to interpret the event as either safe or threatening. In that brief moment, emotional reactions take control. Only afterward does rational thinking begin to analyze what actually happened. Many people mistake this natural reaction for their true judgment, even though it is only the first response of the brain. There was a young employee who often became upset during workplace discussions. Whenever someone criticized his work, he felt defensive and responded quickly. Later, when he reflected on the conversation, he realized his reaction had been stronger than necessary. The criticism was not an attack, but his mind had reacted before he had time to consider that possibility. This pattern appears in many areas of life. A delayed message may cause worry, a disagreement may trigger anger, or a mistake may produce immediate self-criticism. In each case, the emotional reaction arrives first, while thoughtful evaluation arrives later. Understanding this process is the first step toward gaining control over it. Learning to recognize the gap between reaction and reflection allows a person to slow down the emotional response. When you become aware that your mind has reacted automatically, you gain the opportunity to pause before responding outwardly. One useful method is simply breathing and allowing a few seconds of silence. Those few seconds create space for rational thinking to join the situation. Instead of reacting purely from emotion, you begin responding with awareness. There was a student who struggled with anxiety during presentations. Each time he stood in front of others, his mind reacted with fear before he could think clearly. Over time, he practiced slowing his breathing and reminding himself that the fear was only a reaction, not an accurate prediction of failure. Gradually, his experience changed. The fear still appeared at first, but it no longer controlled his actions. By allowing his mind time to think, he could continue speaking calmly despite the initial reaction. This process demonstrates that emotional reactions are not permanent states. They are temporary signals that can be observed rather than obeyed immediately. When a person understands this, the mind becomes less overwhelming. Another important realization is that everyone experiences these quick reactions. Calm individuals are not free from them. They have simply learned to recognize them earlier and respond more thoughtfully. Over time, repeated awareness strengthens this ability. The brain begins expecting a pause before action, and emotional reactions lose some of their power. What once felt automatic becomes something you can observe and guide. By understanding that the mind reacts before it thinks, you stop judging yourself for every emotional response. Instead, you begin focusing on the more important skill, choosing how to respond once awareness arrives. Chapter 3. Perspective changes emotional experience. Two people can face the same situation and experience completely different emotions. One may feel overwhelmed while the other remains calm. The difference is often not the event itself, but the perspective through which it is viewed. Perspective acts like a lens for the mind. It shapes how you interpret events, and that interpretation directly influences how you feel. When something unexpected happens, the mind quickly begins forming a story about it. If that story focuses on danger, loss, or failure, emotions such as fear or frustration appear almost instantly. If the story focuses on possibility, learning, or temporary difficulty, the emotional experience becomes lighter. The event remains the same, but the meaning attached to it changes everything. There was a young professional who once lost an important opportunity he had worked toward for months. At first he felt disappointed and believed the situation was unfair. For several days, his thoughts revolved around what he had lost. Eventually, after speaking with a mentor, he began looking at the situation differently. Instead of seeing the event as a failure, he started viewing it as feedback. The experience revealed areas where he could improve and prepare for the next opportunity. This change in perspective did not erase the difficulty, but it transformed his emotional response. Perspective also influences how long emotions last. When the mind continues repeating a negative interpretation, feelings of stress or frustration often remain strong. When a person intentionally searches for alternative interpretations, emotional intensity often decreases. Another example appears in daily inconveniences. A delayed train, a mistake at work, or an unexpected change of plans can easily create irritation. Yet when those same situations are viewed as minor disruptions rather than personal problems, the emotional response becomes smaller. There was a student who often became anxious whenever he encountered academic challenges. He believed that every mistake was evidence that he was not capable. After learning about perspective, he began treating mistakes as information about what to study next. Over time, this shift changed how he felt about learning. Challenges no longer produced the same level of stress because his interpretation of them had changed. Perspective does not mean pretending difficulties are pleasant. Instead, it means recognizing that there are multiple ways to understand an event. Choosing a constructive interpretation often protects emotional balance. The mind naturally moves toward negative interpretations because it is trying to protect itself from harm. Becoming aware of this tendency allows you to question the first story your mind creates. With practice, perspective becomes a powerful tool for emotional stability. Each time you pause and consider another interpretation, you weaken the habit of reacting with unnecessary stress. Gradually, the emotional experience of life becomes calmer. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to appear manageable, not because life has changed, but because your perspective has become wider and more balanced. Chapter 4. Why stress feels automatic. Stress often feels automatic because the human mind is built to respond quickly to potential problems. Long before modern life existed, the brain developed systems designed to detect danger and prepare the body for action. When early humans faced threats in nature, reacting immediately was essential for survival. That ancient system still operates today, even though many modern challenges are not physical dangers. When something unexpected happens, a mistake at work, an argument, or a sudden responsibility, the brain reacts as if the situation might threaten safety or stability. The body releases stress hormones, breathing becomes faster, and attention narrows toward the problem. These reactions occur before the mind has time to evaluate whether the situation truly requires such intensity. Because this response happens so quickly, many people assume stress is unavoidable. It feels like something that appears automatically, beyond personal control. Yet what actually happens is more complex. The initial reaction may be automatic, but the way a person continues responding afterward can be learned and adjusted. There was a young professional who noticed that his stress appeared whenever deadlines approached. Even when he had enough time to finish his work, his mind reacted as if he were already behind. The pressure he felt was not only about the task itself, but about how his brain interpreted the situation. Stress also becomes automatic through repetition. When someone repeatedly reacts to challenges with worry or tension, the brain begins expecting that pattern. Over time, the response becomes stronger because it has been practiced many times. Another factor is anticipation. The mind often creates stress by imagining future problems before they happen. Thoughts about possible mistakes or negative outcomes trigger the same physical response as real danger. There was a student who felt anxious before every exam. Even when he had studied well, his body reacted with tension the moment he entered the examination hall. His stress came from the anticipation of difficulty rather than the exam itself. The environment of modern life also contributes to this automatic feeling. Constant notifications, responsibilities, and information create a sense of urgency that keeps the brain alert. This continuous stimulation makes it easier for stress to appear. Understanding the automatic nature of stress helps remove self-judgment. Experiencing stress does not mean a person is weak or incapable. It simply means the brain is responding in the way it was designed to respond. However, awareness introduces an important change. When you recognize that the first wave of stress is automatic, you begin separating the reaction from the situation itself. With practice, you can allow the initial stress response to pass without allowing it to control your behavior. Breathing slowly, pausing before reacting, and observing your thoughts help the mind return to a calmer state. Over time, these small practices reshape the pattern of response. Stress may still appear at first, but it no longer feels completely automatic. The mind gradually learns that awareness can guide the reaction instead of simply following it. Chapter 5. Awareness slows emotional reactions. Emotional reactions often appear quickly and without warning. A sudden comment, an unexpected problem, or a stressful situation can trigger frustration, fear, or anger almost instantly. These reactions feel powerful because they arrive before the mind has time to examine them carefully. Awareness changes this process. When a person becomes aware of their emotions as they appear, the reaction begins to slow down. Awareness does not remove emotions. Instead, it allows you to observe them before responding. When you notice the first signs of tension in your body or a sudden shift in your thoughts, you create a small pause between the feeling and your action. That pause becomes the moment where calm thinking can return. There was a young professional who often reacted strongly during difficult conversations at work. Whenever he felt criticized, his voice would rise and his responses became defensive. After learning about emotional awareness, he began paying attention to the physical signals that appeared when his emotions started rising. He noticed that before he spoke sharply, his breathing became faster and his shoulders tightened. Recognizing those signals allowed him to pause before reacting. Instead of answering immediately, he took a moment to breathe and consider his response. This simple pause created a surprising change. The conversations that once escalated into arguments became calmer discussions. The situation had not changed, but his awareness had slowed the reaction. Awareness works because emotions usually follow a predictable pattern. They begin as small sensations in the body or quick thoughts in the mind. When those signals are ignored, the reaction grows stronger and more difficult to control. By observing the early signals, you interrupt that pattern. The emotion still exists, but it does not automatically turn into behavior. This ability to observe without reacting is one of the foundations of emotional stability. There was a student who practiced awareness during stressful study periods. Whenever he felt overwhelmed, he paused for a few breaths, instead of immediately criticizing himself. This short pause allowed his thoughts to become clearer. Gradually, he noticed that his stress no longer escalated as quickly as before. The awareness of his emotional state slowed the reaction before it could become intense. Another benefit of awareness is that it encourages curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of telling yourself that you should not feel a certain way, you simply observe what is happening inside your mind. Over time, repeated awareness trains the brain to expect that pause before reacting. The emotional reaction still appears, but it moves more slowly and feels less overwhelming. This is how awareness reshapes emotional habits. By noticing your emotions as they arise, you create the space needed to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting automatically. Chapter 6. Positive thinking is a habit. Many people assume that positive thinking is something that only naturally optimistic individuals possess. They believe some people simply see the bright side of life, while others cannot. In reality, positivity often functions like any other habit of the mind. Just as the brain can learn patterns of worry or criticism, it can also learn patterns of constructive thinking. What appears as natural optimism is often the result of repeated mental choices practiced over time. The mind continuously interprets the events of daily life. Every situation can be viewed from multiple angles. When something goes wrong, the mind may focus on loss, failure, or disappointment. That interpretation produces negative emotions almost instantly. Yet the same situation can also be interpreted as temporary, educational, or manageable. The emotional result becomes very different. There was a young employee who believed he was naturally pessimistic. Whenever a problem appeared at work, his first thought was that something had gone terribly wrong. After paying attention to his thinking patterns, he realized that his mind had simply practiced negative interpretations for years. Instead of trying to force himself to feel positive immediately, he began adjusting small thoughts throughout the day. When something went wrong, he asked himself a simple question: what can this situation teach me? This small shift gradually changed how he experienced challenges. Positive thinking does not mean pretending that problems do not exist. Real positivity acknowledges difficulty while refusing to assume the worst possible outcome. It allows the mind to remain constructive rather than defeated. Habits of thought develop through repetition. Each time you choose a hopeful or solution-focused interpretation, you strengthen that mental pathway. The brain begins recognizing this pattern as familiar and easier to follow. There was a student who struggled with self-doubt during difficult subjects. Whenever he made a mistake, he concluded that he lacked ability. Over time, he practiced replacing that thought with a different one. Mistakes show me what I need to improve. Gradually, his attitude toward learning changed. The same academic challenges remained, but his emotional response became more balanced. Positive thinking also affects attention. The brain naturally notices what it expects to find. If the mind expects problems everywhere, it will constantly discover evidence of difficulty. If it expects opportunity or improvement, it begins noticing progress instead. Another important part of positive thinking is language. The words you use when describing events influence how you experience them. Describing a situation as a disaster creates a different emotional response than describing it as a challenge. Over time, these small adjustments in thinking accumulate. The brain learns that constructive interpretation is the normal response rather than negativity. Eventually, positivity becomes less about effort and more about habit. The mind begins searching for solutions, learning opportunities, and possibilities automatically. This shift does not remove life's challenges, but it transforms how you experience them. Chapter 7. Controlling attention changes mood. Mood often feels like something that simply happens to us. A person wakes up feeling calm one day and restless the next, and it seems as if emotions appear without a clear cause. Yet mood is closely connected to where attention goes throughout the day. The mind continuously focuses on certain thoughts, memories, or situations. That focus gradually shapes how a person feels. Attention works like a spotlight. Whatever it illuminates becomes stronger in the mind. When attention stays on worries, disappointments, or imagined problems, the emotional atmosphere becomes heavier. The mind begins building a narrative around those concerns, and the mood slowly follows the direction of that narrative. There was a young professional who often felt overwhelmed during stressful weeks. He noticed that his thoughts repeatedly returned to the same unfinished tasks and future responsibilities. Even during moments of rest, his attention remained fixed on potential problems. After reflecting on this pattern, he began experimenting with redirecting his attention deliberately. When he noticed his thoughts returning to worries, he shifted his focus toward the task directly in front of him or toward something constructive he could do immediately. The change did not remove his responsibilities, but it changed how he experienced them. By focusing on the present action rather than the entire list of future concerns, his mood became calmer and more stable. Controlling attention does not mean forcing the mind to ignore reality. Instead, it means deciding which part of reality deserves your focus at any given moment. Every situation contains multiple elements: problems, possibilities, lessons, and progress. There was a student who struggled with discouragement while preparing for difficult exams. His attention constantly returned to the idea that he might fail. After learning about attention, he began focusing instead on the progress he made each day while studying. Over time, this change influenced his emotional state. The same exam still existed, but his mood improved because his attention highlighted effort and improvement rather than fear. Attention also influences how long emotions last. When the mind repeatedly revisits negative thoughts, the emotional response continues. When attention moves toward constructive activities or neutral observations, the emotion gradually fades. Another important discovery is that attention can be trained. Activities such as reading, deep breathing, or focusing on a physical task help strengthen the ability to guide where the mind rests. With practice, a person becomes more aware of where their attention goes during the day. Instead of drifting automatically towards stress or worry, they learn to redirect it consciously. As this ability grows stronger, mood becomes less unpredictable. Emotions still appear naturally, but they are no longer entirely controlled by random thoughts. The direction of attention gradually becomes the direction of emotional experience. Chapter 8. Letting go of unnecessary worry. Worry often appears as if it is helping us prepare for the future. The mind believes that by thinking about possible problems repeatedly, it can prevent them from happening, yet in many situations, worry does not lead to solutions. Instead, it repeats the same concerns without producing new understanding. When the mind continues this cycle, emotional tension grows, even though the situation itself may not be changing. Many worries are connected to events that have not yet occurred. The mind imagines outcomes that may never happen and begins reacting to them as if they are already real. This process creates stress without providing any useful action. Learning to recognize unnecessary worry begins with noticing when thoughts move away from practical problem solving and into endless repetition. There was a young professional who often lay awake at night thinking about possible mistakes at work. His mind replayed situations from the day and imagined negative reactions from others. The next morning he realized that most of the things he worried about never happened. Once he noticed this pattern, he began asking himself a simple question whenever worry appeared. Is there something I can do about this right now? If the answer was yes, he focused on the action. If the answer was no, he practiced letting the thought pass. Letting go of unnecessary worry does not mean ignoring responsibility. Real problems still require attention and effort. The difference lies in recognizing when thinking becomes repetitive instead of productive. The mind often continues worrying because it feels unfinished. When a person decides either to take action or to release the thought, the mind receives a clear signal that the issue has been addressed for now. There was a student who worried constantly about upcoming exams weeks before they began. After noticing that this worry did not help him study better, he shifted his attention toward preparing during scheduled study times instead of worrying throughout the day. Gradually, he noticed that his stress levels decreased. The exams still required effort, but his mind no longer carried them as a constant background tension. Another helpful practice is redirecting attention toward the present moment. Activities such as walking, reading, or focusing on breathing remind the mind that not every thought requires extended attention. Worry often feels urgent because the brain interprets uncertainty as a threat. Recognizing that uncertainty is a natural part of life allows the mind to relax its constant search for control. Over time, practicing this awareness weakens the habit of unnecessary worry. Thoughts still appear, but they lose their ability to dominate attention. Eventually, letting go of unnecessary worry becomes easier. The mind learns that calm attention and practical action are far more useful than repeating the same concern without progress. Another reason worry becomes persistent is the belief that thinking about a problem repeatedly will eventually produce certainty. The mind hopes that if it analyzes every possible outcome, it can avoid unpleasant surprises. Yet many parts of life remain unpredictable, no matter how much we think about them. Recognizing this truth is the beginning of releasing unnecessary worry. Instead of demanding perfect certainty, the mind gradually learns to tolerate uncertainty with patience. There was a manager who constantly worried about how future business decisions might turn out. He spent long hours imagining potential mistakes before they even occurred. Eventually, he realized that most of his energy was being used by situations that did not yet exist. Once he accepted that not every outcome could be predicted, his thinking became more balanced. Unnecessary worry also grows when the mind confuses preparation with overthinking. Preparing for a challenge means taking practical steps to improve the situation. Overthinking, on the other hand, repeats the same concerns without producing action. Learning to recognize the difference helps a person shift from worry toward constructive effort. Another useful practice is writing worries down instead of carrying them mentally all day. When a concern is written on paper, it becomes clearer and easier to evaluate. Some worries reveal practical actions, while others reveal themselves as temporary thoughts that do not require attention. There was a student who used this method before examinations. Whenever anxious thoughts appeared, he wrote them down and asked himself whether each concern required action. Most of them did not. Seeing them written helped him realize how exaggerated many of his worries had become. Letting go of worry also requires trusting your ability to respond when real problems appear. Many people worry because they doubt their future capability. Strengthening confidence through preparation and experience reduces this doubt. Another helpful reminder is that worry rarely improves performance. Excessive tension often makes thinking less clear and decisions more difficult. A calm mind is better equipped to handle challenges when they actually arise. There was an athlete who noticed that constant worry before competitions affected his focus. After practicing relaxation and accepting uncertainty, he found that his performance improved because his mind remained clear. It is also helpful to recognize that the mind naturally returns to familiar thinking patterns. If worry has been practiced for years, it may appear frequently at first. Patience is necessary while the mind learns a different approach. Redirecting attention toward meaningful activity can weaken worry's influence. Engaging fully in work, conversation, or learning prevents the mind from circling around the same anxious thoughts. Over time, repeated awareness builds a new habit. Instead of becoming trapped in worry, the mind begins recognizing when thoughts are unproductive and gently releases them. Gradually, life begins to feel lighter. Situations that once triggered long periods of anxious thinking become manageable. By letting go of unnecessary worry, you create space for clearer thinking, better decisions, and a calmer emotional state. Chapter 9. Simple routines create inner stability. Daily life often feels unpredictable because events change constantly. Responsibilities appear unexpectedly, plans shift, and new challenges interrupt carefully organized schedules. When the external world moves in this way, the mind can easily become unsettled. Simple routines provide a stabilizing influence within this uncertainty. By repeating certain actions each day, You create a small structure that supports emotional balance regardless of what happens around you. Routines do not have to be complicated to be effective. In fact, the most powerful routines are often the simplest ones. Waking at a consistent time, taking a few moments to plan the day, exercising regularly, or spending quiet time reflecting are small actions that create a sense of order. When these habits repeat daily, they begin shaping the rhythm of your life. There was a young professional whose work schedule changed frequently. At first, he felt overwhelmed by the constant variation in his tasks. Eventually, he introduced a simple morning routine that remained the same regardless of his workload. Those quiet moments of planning and reflection created a sense of control before the day began. Routines also reduce the number of decisions you must make. Each decision requires mental energy. When routines guide certain parts of your day automatically, the mind has more energy available for important choices and creative thinking. Another benefit of routines is emotional predictability. When you know that certain activities will occur each day, your mind begins to relax. The familiar pattern creates a feeling of stability even when other parts of life remain uncertain. There was a student who often felt anxious before beginning his studies. After establishing a consistent study routine each evening, his anxiety decreased. The routine signaled to his mind that it was time to focus, making the transition easier. Simple routines also encourage consistency in healthy habits. Activities like exercise, reading, or quiet reflection become easier when they are connected to a regular time or environment. Another discovery people often make is that routines create moments of pause. In a busy life filled with constant movement, these pauses allow the mind to reset and regain balance. There was a teacher who spent a few minutes each afternoon reviewing the events of the day. This small routine helped her release stress before returning home. Routines do not remove life's difficulties, but they provide a stable foundation that supports emotional resilience. When challenges appear, the mind can rely on familiar habits to regain calmness. Over time, these repeated actions strengthen the sense that your inner state does not depend entirely on external events. Gradually, simple routines become quiet anchors throughout the day. They guide attention, support emotional balance, and create the stability needed for a calm and positive life. Simple routines also help the mind move smoothly between different parts of the day. Without structure, the transition from rest to work or from work to relaxation can feel abrupt and stressful. Routines soften these transitions. A short walk in the morning, a moment of planning before work begins, or a few minutes of reflection before sleep can create a steady rhythm that guides the mind gently from one activity to another. There was a young entrepreneur whose days were often filled with unpredictable meetings and responsibilities. At first, he felt mentally scattered because each day seemed different from the last. Eventually, he created a small evening routine where he reviewed what he had accomplished and prepared a short plan for the next day. This routine did not eliminate his busy schedule, but it gave him a sense of order. When routines repeat consistently, the brain begins recognizing them as signals. For example, when a person sits in the same place each evening to read or study, the mind gradually associates that environment with focus. Over time, concentration appears more easily because the routine has trained the brain to expect it. Another benefit of routines is that they reduce emotional fatigue. When the mind constantly reacts to unexpected events, stress gradually accumulates. Routines act as small islands of stability within the day, allowing the mind to rest between challenges. There was a student who struggled with anxiety before exams. Instead of studying randomly, he built a simple routine: review notes at the same time each afternoon and take a short walk afterward. The familiarity of this pattern calmed his mind and helped him concentrate better. Routines also influence sleep and energy levels. Going to bed and waking up at consistent times helps the body develop a natural rhythm. When this rhythm becomes stable, the mind feels more balanced throughout the day. Another discovery people make is that routines encourage discipline without constant effort. When an action becomes habitual, it requires less motivation. The activity simply becomes part of the day. There was a writer who dedicated a small period each morning to writing before doing anything else. Even on days when inspiration felt distant, the routine ensured that progress continued. Simple routines also provide moments of reflection. A quiet cup of tea, a short walk, or a few minutes of journaling can become opportunities to observe your thoughts and emotions. Over time, these repeated moments of reflection help you understand your reactions more clearly. The mind becomes less reactive and more thoughtful. Routines do not need to fill every hour of the day. Their strength comes from consistency rather than complexity. Gradually, these small repeated actions become the foundation of inner stability. When life becomes unpredictable, the routines remain steady, reminding you that calmness can grow from the simple patterns you choose to repeat each day. Chapter 10. Gratitude strengthens positive thinking. Gratitude is often misunderstood as a simple expression of politeness, yet it plays a much deeper role in shaping the way the mind experiences life. When a person intentionally notices what is good or meaningful in their surroundings, the brain begins forming a different pattern of attention. Instead of constantly searching for problems or disappointments, the mind gradually becomes more aware of positive elements that already exist. The human brain naturally gives more attention to difficulties. This tendency developed long ago, when noticing danger was necessary for survival. Because of this habit, people often remember negative experiences more clearly than positive ones. Gratitude works against this natural bias by encouraging the mind to recognize moments of support, kindness, and opportunity. There was a young teacher who often felt overwhelmed by the challenges of her work. She began ending each day by writing down 3 things that had gone well. At first, the exercise felt small and unimportant, but after several weeks, she noticed something unexpected. Her attention during the day had begun searching for those positive moments automatically. Gratitude does not deny the presence of problems. Instead, it widens perspective. Difficulties still exist, but they are no longer the only focus of attention. When a person notices both challenges and positive elements, emotional balance becomes easier to maintain. Another important effect of gratitude is its influence on relationships. When people regularly recognize the efforts and kindness of others, communication becomes warmer and more respectful. Small acts of appreciation strengthen connections between individuals. There was a student who often felt isolated during his studies. After making a habit of thanking classmates and teachers for small forms of help, he began noticing that conversations became more friendly and supportive. Gratitude also changes internal dialogue. Many people criticize themselves harshly when they make mistakes. By practicing gratitude toward their own efforts and progress, they create a more encouraging mental environment. The practice itself does not need to be complicated. Simply pausing for a moment each day to acknowledge something meaningful, a helpful conversation, a quiet moment of peace, or progress toward a goal can begin reshaping attention. There was a writer who practiced gratitude during difficult creative periods. Whenever frustration appeared, he reminded himself that the opportunity to write and learn was itself something valuable. Over time, repeated gratitude builds a habit of noticing possibility instead of only difficulty. The mind begins recognizing supportive elements that were previously ignored. This change influences mood gradually. Life does not suddenly become perfect, but the emotional experience becomes lighter and more hopeful. As gratitude becomes part of daily thinking, positive interpretations appear more naturally. The mind learns to see balance in situations, allowing calmness and optimism to grow alongside life's inevitable challenges. Gratitude also influences how the mind remembers experiences. When people regularly focus on what went wrong, those memories become stronger and easier to recall. Over time, this pattern can create the impression that life contains more difficulty than it actually does. Practicing gratitude gradually changes this memory pattern. When you intentionally notice positive moments, the brain begins storing those experiences more clearly. There was a young doctor who worked in a demanding hospital environment. Most days were filled with stress and urgent responsibilities. To maintain balance, he began reflecting each evening on a few moments when he had helped someone successfully. These small reminders helped him see that his work contained meaning alongside its pressure. Gratitude also shifts the mind away from constant comparison. In modern life, it is easy to measure your progress against the achievements of others. This comparison often creates dissatisfaction even when life is moving forward. Gratitude redirects attention toward what you already possess and what you have accomplished. Another benefit appears in patience. When people focus only on what they have not yet achieved, progress can feel frustratingly slow. Recognizing what has already improved creates encouragement to continue moving forward. There was a student preparing for difficult examinations who practiced gratitude during his study routine. Each evening he acknowledged the effort he had invested that day. Instead of focusing only on the large challenge ahead, he appreciated the progress made step by step. Gratitude also strengthens emotional resilience. When setbacks occur, a person who regularly practices appreciation can more easily maintain perspective. The mind remembers that life contains both challenges and supportive elements. Another discovery is that gratitude improves awareness of ordinary experiences. Simple things such as a peaceful moment in the morning, a meaningful conversation, or the comfort of a familiar place begin to feel more valuable. There was a traveler who noticed that keeping a small gratitude journal during his journeys made each day feel richer. Instead of rushing through experiences, he paused to notice details that might otherwise have been ignored. Gratitude also influences motivation. When you appreciate the opportunities available to you, effort begins to feel more meaningful rather than burdensome. Another effect appears in how people approach relationships. Expressing appreciation strengthens trust and warmth, creating a positive environment for cooperation and understanding. Over time, gratitude becomes less of a deliberate exercise and more of a natural habit. The mind begins searching for what is meaningful rather than only what is missing. As this habit develops, positive thinking grows stronger. The emotional experience of life becomes more balanced, not because problems disappear, but because the mind learns to recognize the good that continues to exist alongside them. Chapter 11. Patience reduces emotional pressure. Patience is often misunderstood as passive waiting, yet in reality, it is a powerful form of emotional control. Many pressures people feel come from the belief that results must appear quickly. When outcomes do not arrive immediately, frustration and anxiety begin to grow. Patience changes this relationship with time. It allows the mind to remain steady even when progress unfolds slowly. Modern life encourages speed in nearly everything. Messages are delivered instantly, information appears within seconds, and many tasks are completed quickly through technology. Because of this environment, the mind gradually expects the same speed from every part of life. When personal goals, relationships, or achievements require more time, emotional pressure appears. There was a young professional who felt constant stress about his career progress. Each year, he expected dramatic improvements and felt disappointed when progress seemed slower than he imagined. After speaking with a mentor, he realized that many meaningful achievements require years of consistent effort. When he began adjusting his expectations, the emotional pressure began decreasing. The same work continued, but his mindset changed from urgency to steady development. Patience also reduces emotional reactions during difficult moments. When a problem appears, the impatient mind wants an immediate solution. If the answer is not obvious, frustration grows quickly. Patience allows the mind to remain calm long enough to evaluate the situation carefully. There was a student who often became overwhelmed when studying challenging subjects. Instead of rushing through material, he practiced slowing down and accepting that understanding would come gradually. This approach reduced his anxiety and improved his concentration. Another benefit of patience is improved decision-making. When emotions are intense, people often make quick choices they later regret. Allowing time before responding creates space for clearer thinking. Patience also strengthens resilience. When a person understands that progress may take time, setbacks feel less discouraging. They become temporary obstacles rather than signs of failure. There was a writer who struggled with creative work because he expected every idea to succeed immediately. After learning to accept slower progress, he became more willing to experiment and learn from mistakes. Patience influences relationships as well. Many conflicts arise because people react quickly when emotions are strong. Pausing and allowing time for understanding often prevents unnecessary arguments. Over time, practicing patience reshapes how the mind experiences pressure. Situations that once felt urgent begin to feel manageable because the mind no longer demands instant resolution. As patience becomes a habit, emotional stability grows stronger. Life continues presenting challenges, but the mind learns to move through them steadily instead of reacting with constant tension. Patience also changes how the mind experiences progress. Many people feel pressure because they constantly measure their results against how quickly they believe improvement should happen. When the mind expects rapid change, even steady progress can feel disappointing. Patience shifts this perspective. It teaches the mind to value gradual movement instead of immediate results. There was a young athlete who trained intensely, but often felt frustrated when his performance did not improve quickly. His coach explained that physical strength and endurance develop through repetition over long periods. Once he accepted this reality, the training process began to feel more meaningful. Instead of focusing only on results, he started appreciating the daily effort that slowly built his ability. Patience also reduces the emotional weight of uncertainty. Many stressful situations arise because people want answers immediately. When those answers are delayed, the mind fills the gap with worry or doubt. Accepting that some situations require time allows the mind to remain calmer during periods of uncertainty. Another benefit of patience appears in learning. Understanding complex ideas often requires repeated exposure and reflection. When a person rushes through learning, frustration grows quickly. Allowing time for gradual understanding creates a more stable learning process. There was a student who struggled with mathematics and believed he lacked ability. After practicing patient study habits, reviewing material slowly, and returning to difficult concepts, he began improving steadily. His success came not from sudden talent, but from persistent patience. Patience also protects emotional energy. When people react quickly to every difficulty, their energy becomes exhausted by constant tension. By allowing situations to unfold naturally, they preserve mental strength for moments that truly require attention. Another discovery is that patience encourages better listening. In conversations, people often interrupt or react before fully understanding the other person's perspective. Waiting calmly before responding creates space for deeper communication. There was a manager who noticed that many workplace disagreements came from rushed conversations. By slowing discussions and allowing each person to explain their ideas fully, conflicts became easier to resolve. Patience also builds confidence in the long-term process of growth. When a person trusts that progress will appear through consistent effort, they no longer feel the need to rush every step. Over time, practicing patience changes how the mind approaches challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as urgent problems, they become part of a longer journey of improvement. This shift in perspective reduces emotional pressure because the mind no longer demands instant success. Gradually, patience becomes a quiet strength. It allows the mind to remain steady, focused, and balanced, even when life unfolds more slowly than expected. Chapter 12. Building long-term mental balance. Patience also changes how the mind experiences progress. Many people feel pressure because they constantly measure their results against how quickly they believe improvement should happen. When the mind expects rapid change, even steady progress can feel disappointing. Patience shifts this perspective. It teaches the mind to value gradual movement instead of immediate results. There was a young athlete who trained intensely, but often felt frustrated when his performance did not improve quickly. His coach explained that physical strength and endurance develop through repetition over long periods. Once he accepted this reality, the training process began to feel more meaningful. Instead of focusing only on results, he started appreciating the daily effort that slowly built his ability. Patience also reduces the emotional weight of uncertainty. Many stressful situations arise because people want answers immediately. When those answers are delayed, the mind fills the gap with worry or doubt. Accepting that some situations require time allows the mind to remain calmer during periods of uncertainty. Another benefit of patience appears in learning. Understanding complex ideas often requires repeated exposure and reflection. When a person rushes through learning, frustration grows quickly. Allowing time for gradual understanding creates a more stable learning process. There was a student who struggled with mathematics and believed he lacked ability. After practicing patient study habits, reviewing material slowly, and returning to difficult concepts, he began improving steadily. His success came not from sudden talent, but from persistent patience. Patience also protects emotional energy. When people react quickly to every difficulty, their energy becomes exhausted by constant tension. By allowing situations to unfold naturally, they preserve mental strength for moments that truly require attention. Another discovery is that patience encourages better listening. In conversations, people often interrupt or react before fully understanding the other person's perspective. Waiting calmly before responding creates space for deeper communication. There was a manager who noticed that many workplace disagreements came from rushed conversations. By slowing discussions and allowing each person to explain their ideas fully, conflicts became easier to resolve. Patience also builds confidence in the long-term process of growth. When a person trusts that progress will appear through consistent effort, they no longer feel the need to rush every step. Over time, practicing patience changes how the mind approaches challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as urgent problems, they become part of a longer journey of improvement. This shift in perspective reduces emotional pressure because the mind no longer demands instant success. Gradually, patience becomes a quiet strength. It allows the mind to remain steady, focused, and balanced, even when life unfolds more slowly than expected. Building long-term mental balance also requires understanding that emotional stability grows through daily repetition rather than dramatic transformation. Many people expect a single realization or motivational moment to permanently change their mindset. While insight can be powerful, lasting change usually comes from practicing calm responses repeatedly until they become natural. Each time you choose awareness instead of reaction, you strengthen the foundation of emotional balance. There was a teacher who once believed that her stress came entirely from the demands of her profession. She worked long hours and faced constant challenges from students and responsibilities. Over time, she began practicing small habits that protected her mental clarity, such as quiet reflection at the end of each day and short breaks during difficult moments. These simple habits gradually changed how she experienced her work. Long-term balance also depends on the ability to recover after emotional difficulty. Everyone encounters moments of frustration, disappointment, or sadness. What separates balanced individuals from overwhelmed ones is often their ability to return to calmness after those moments pass. Recovery becomes easier when the mind understands that emotions are temporary. When a person believes a difficult feeling will last forever, the emotional pressure increases. Recognizing that emotions rise and fall naturally allows the mind to remain patient. Another important factor in maintaining balance is physical well-being. Sleep, movement, and proper rest have a direct effect on emotional stability. When the body is exhausted, the mind becomes more reactive and less capable of thoughtful responses. There was a young entrepreneur who noticed that his emotional reactions became stronger during periods of poor sleep. Once he began protecting his rest more carefully, his decision-making and mood improved noticeably. Long-term balance also requires realistic expectations. Life will always contain unexpected events, disagreements, and temporary setbacks. Accepting this reality prevents the mind from feeling shocked whenever difficulties appear. Another helpful habit is reflection. Taking time to review experiences helps the mind learn from them. Instead of repeating the same reactions, a person begins noticing patterns and adjusting their behavior. There was a student who kept a small journal where he wrote about situations that affected his emotions. Over time, this practice helped him recognize triggers that previously caused stress. Mental balance also grows when people remain connected to meaningful values. When actions align with personal values, the mind experiences a sense of purpose that stabilizes emotional reactions. Gradually, these habits form a reliable inner structure. Even when life becomes unpredictable, the mind knows how to return to calm awareness. With time and consistent effort, long-term mental balance becomes a natural state rather than a constant struggle. The mind learns that peace is not created by perfect circumstances, but by the steady practice of awareness, patience, and thoughtful living. Calmness and positivity are not qualities that only certain people possess. They are patterns that develop through awareness and repetition. The mind naturally reacts to difficulty with tension and worry, but with practice, those reactions can become slower and more thoughtful. Each moment of awareness gives you a chance to respond differently. Over time, small changes in attention, perspective, and habits begin to reshape your emotional experience. Stressful situations still appear, but they no longer control your inner state. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin responding with clarity and patience. This is how a calm and positive life gradually forms, not through perfect circumstances, but through a steady and balanced mind.